Order, please. Begin the daily routine. Presenting, reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The honorable member for Colchester, Muscatawbet Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, would I be permitted to do an introduction before I table this?
Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in your gallery, I would like to introduce some very, very special guests. And perhaps we'll start to your left, Mr. Speaker. I would like to recognize and ask the individual to stand, and every individual to stand that we do introduce here, because they worked very hard over the last month. I'd like to introduce George Archibald, a former Minister of Agriculture and colleague of mine in the House. I'd also like to introduce the Executive Director of the Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture, Mr. Lawrence Nason. Mr. Larry Weatherby. Larry's a farmer just outside of Truro in Lower Harmony, Colchester County. And Mr. Speaker, I know that you know our next guest because he's a constituent of yours and a beef producer from Cumberland County, Collingwood, Mr. Kurt Sherman. Mr. Speaker, as well, I'd like to introduce Mr. Don Cox, a producer and the first Vice President of Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture, and as well a member of the task force, and as well a producer and a past President of the Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture, Mr. Anthony Van Ostrom. And Mr. Leo Cox has now joined the entourage, I believe, with his wife. And I'd ask Mr. Cox, who is the chairman of the Nova Scotia Farm Loan Board and a producer from Inverness, to take a bow. So I trust we were able to name the members of our task force. And of course, Mr. Nason is down today because, Mr. Speaker, getting back to the agenda, I'm very pleased today to table the Agriculture Task Force on BSE, the Mad Cow Disease Report. And thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. The report is tabled. Certainly want to welcome our special gallery today and hope they enjoy the proceedings this afternoon. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the annual report of the Colchester East Hants Health Authority.
Report is tabled. The Honourable Member for Colchester Musqueam Valley.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I know this is a little out of sync with the agenda, but I neglected to mention a very, very important member of the Agriculture Task Force on the BSE and mad cow disease, and that's Mr. Stephen McNeil, the Agriculture Committee for the Liberal Caucus. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you. Statements by ministers. Government notice of motion. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Government notice of motion, Mr. Speaker.
Government notice of motion, yes.
Mr. Speaker, I move, hereby give notice on a future day, I shall move adoption of the following resolution. Whereas this Sunday, November the 2nd, will mark the 10-year anniversary of the election of the member from Colchester Musqueam Valley to these historic chambers. And whereas in that time span of 10 years, the member from Colchester and the beautiful Musqueam Valley has won 4 successive elections, all of them by huge majorities. And whereas the member from Colchester Musqueam Valley is articulate and colourful at times, but first and foremost, Mr. Speaker, first and foremost, he represents his constituents in an exemplary fashion. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, be it resolved that MLAs in the legislature commend the member from Colchester Musqueam Valley on his 10-year anniversary this week and wish him at least another successful 10 years of electoral success. And with favour of notice.
Question waivers are agreed. All in favour say aye. Contrary-minded nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas October 31st is the opening day of the general deer hunting season for 2003, and whereas more than 50,000 people will take part in hunting and trapping activities throughout the year and make a significant contribution to the province's rural economy, and whereas hunter education has been mandatory in Nova Scotia since 1980, and the time and effort put into this program by volunteer instructors is reflected into a low number of accidents over the past number of years. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House encourage hunters to continue to make safety a #1 priority while respecting the rights of Nova Scotia landowners, and to remind them to obtain proper training, permits, and licenses. And, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The honourable member for Halifax-Shabak. The honourable member for Halifax-Shabakto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 8 of the Acts of 1990, the Emergency Measures Act.
The honourable member for Shabakto begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 8 of the Acts of 1990, the Emergency Measures Act.
Bill number 35, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 8 of the Acts of 1990, the Emergency Measures Act.
Order this bill be read a second time at a future date. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce an act entitled An Act Respecting the Protection of Medicare in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting the Protection of Medicare in Nova Scotia.
Bill 36, entitled An Act Respecting the Protection of Medicare in Nova Scotia.
Order this bill be read a second time at a future date. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 3 of the Acts of 1987, the Canadian Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Act.
Good bill.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 3 of the Acts of 1987, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Nova Scotia Act.
Bill 37, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 3 of the Acts of 1987, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Nova Scotia Act.
Order this bill be read a second time at a future date. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill, an act to amend Chapter 293 of the revised statutes of the 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 293 of the revised statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
Bill 38, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
Order this bill be read a second time at a future date. The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table an act entitled An Act to Provide for Accountability in Healthcare Spending.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Provide for Accountability in Healthcare Spending.
Bill 39, entitled An Act to Provide for Accountability in Healthcare Spending.
Order this bill be read a second time at a future date. Notice of motion. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Cape Breton Regional Municipality received a governance study recently which reinforced the long-held perception that Cape Breton was not receiving its fair share of support from this government. And whereas the Premier's response to this report was flippant and curt, and whereas the CPRM Council are looking for, what they are looking for is a reasoned, thorough, respectful response from this government, therefore be it resolved this government release the independent analysis being conducted on the CBRM governance study, and that the Premier meet with CBRM Council to discuss the challenges facing the region. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
Waiver here, no. Notice is tabled. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the leader of the Socialist NDP party has publicly declared support for the Tories' budget in the spring of 2004 without even knowing its substance, and whereas this is the same lacking logic applied by the member for Halifax-Chebucto when that member declared that he would vote against the budget in 1998, even before the budget was tabled, and whereas responsible legislators will examine all aspects of a $4.5 billion budget, including medical costs for seniors, escalating university tuition fees, DHA budgets, the growing debt, just to mention a few, therefore be it resolved, the leader of the Socialist NDP party and the clairvoyant member for Halifax-Chebucto be chastised for their continued trolling for power. Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver of notice.
Mr. Waiver, there are several noes. Notice is tabled. The honourable member Colchester, Muscatawbet Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the early morning hours of Sunday, August the 10th, will be ones remembered in infamy by members of the Cobequid District and Onslow Belmont Fire Brigades, and whereas in response to a call to Smitty's Restaurant in Lower Truro late Saturday evening, Cobequid firefighters at first were told a small fire had been extinguished, and whereas this proved to not be the case, and within a short period of time, Cobequid Fire Chief, and I might add Farmer James Ewell, was ordering firefighters from the roof structure less than 5 minutes before the roof caved in. Therefore, be it resolved, MLAs in the legislature commend the training and knowledge put forth by members of the Cobequid and Onslow Belmont Fire Brigades, which ultimately prevented tragedy from striking, and commend the other Colchester County brigades for their quick mutual aid response to the $1 million Smitty's Restaurant fire. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Eastern Passage Pee Wee Sharks baseball team, after a slow start this season, went on to finish regular play with a record of 14-7. Whereas these young athletes won silver medals at Woodside to advance to the provincial championships. Whereas the Sharks finished off their season winning the gold medal at the provincial Tier 2 championship in Spring Hill. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulate the Eastern Passage Pee Wee Shark players on winning the Nova Scotia Pee Wee Baseball Tier 2 Championship, and thank their parents and supporters, Manager Don White, Coach Garnett Wilson, and assistant coaches Tom McMahon and Jamie Hoyt for their commitment to these young players and the game of baseball. And I ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on October 30th, 1953, the St. Peter's Community Club held its first meeting at the new McDougall School with the mandate to provide new furniture for local schools. Whereas since that time, the Community Club was instrumental in the establishment of Battery Park, a provincial camping park, the organization of the first municipal waste collection system in Richmond County, the building of the Nicholas Denny Museum in 1967, lobbying for sidewalks in the community, offering scholarships, and other initiatives to help grow the community of St. Peter's. Whereas this Thursday evening, October 30th, 2003, the community and members of the St. Peter's Community Club will meet at the St. Peter's Lion Hall to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the formation of the group with an evening of celebration which will also recognize the 90th birthday of Mrs. Charlotte Stone, one of the founding members. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House congratulate the membership of the St. Peter's Community Club for their 50 years of dedication to the community of St. Peter's and encourage them to continue their efforts for many years to come. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Waverley, Fall River, Beaverbank.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotians' average weekly earnings in the month of August 2003 increased 0.1% over July 2003, and whereas Nova Scotia's average weekly earnings increased 1.3% over August 2002, and whereas the average weekly earnings increase in Nova Scotia is above the national average, therefore be it resolved that all members of the House be encouraged by the increase in our average weekly earnings and its positive impact on the province of Nova Scotia and their families. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favour say aye. Counterminded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Needham on introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to members of the House, visitors who are in our West Gallery from Autumn House in Amherst, Cumberland County. We have here today with us Carolyn Foster, Wilma McCarran, Nancy Gayton, Carolyn Sutherland, Patty Ferdinand, Ruth Curry, Carol Wilson, and Rhonda Canfield, and they are 8 of the 10 women who are on strike at Autumn House in the 12th week of a labor dispute. They are here to watch the proceedings in the House today. They are missing their colleagues Terry Cove and Agnes Douglas, who are at the CUPE convention out of province, and I would ask them to stand and receive the warm welcome of members of this House.
Thank you, and we certainly welcome our special guest to the gallery today, the honourable member for Victoria Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Jean McNeil of Bulletree, Victoria County, is one of 2 Nova Scotians nominated for this year's Governor-General's Award, and whereas the Governor-General's Award is one of prestigious literary prizes in Canada, and whereas Ms. McNeil has written 2 novels, a collection of short stories, and one of the popular Rough Guide travel books. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Jean McNeil for being nominated to receive this year's Governor-General Award. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution.
Hear, hear.
Whereas the Gemini Awards honor the finest in Canadian television and broadcasting.
Yes.
And whereas this year, my constituent, Thorburn native Mike Smith, won the viewer's choice for his role on the Trailer Park Boys. And whereas Mr. Smith plays Bubbles, a character identified most notably by his Coke bottle glasses on the television hit. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the House join me in extending our congratulations to Mike Smith on winning the Viewer's Choice Award at this year's Gemini. And I seek waiver of notice.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas many people in Dartmouth East and certainly across this province suffered damage to property and possessions, including the food in the freezers due to Hurricane Juan, and whereas the government is offering assistance to those who suffered losses, but with a deductible of $1,000, and whereas many people who suffered the most are among the working poor and could not afford insurance in the first place, and certainly cannot afford a deductible of $1,000. Therefore, be it resolved that this government eliminate the $1,000 deductible charged to those who can least afford it and reimburse these very same people for their losses suffered as a result of Hurricane Juan without charging them the ridiculous deductible. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver.
Waiver, is it agreed? Here or no? No is tabled. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on October 19th, Mount St. Vincent University held its fall convocation ceremony, and whereas Thelma Coward Ince was part of that convocation ceremony, receiving her arts degree and a major in women's studies, and whereas single mothers like Thelma face special and difficult challenges in education and in life, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House extend sincere congratulations to Thelma Coward Ince for facing those challenges head-on and earning her diploma from Mount St. Vincent University. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas through difficult negotiations but extreme persistence, Shelburne County marksmen now have a target range for the first since 1992. And whereas with the assistance of municipality, the Shelburne Fish and Game Association raised nearly all of the $20,000 needed to make the shooting range a reality. And whereas the range is certified for use by a shooter for any caliber rifle while preparing big game hunters for the hunting season. Therefore, be resolved in my liaison this legislature commend the Shelburne Fishing Game Association, local area municipality, the Provincial Department of Natural Resources, and the Nova Scotia Department of Justice for making this new target range a reality for Shelburne County. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax, Shabakto.
Speaker, thank you. I'll be seeking waiver. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas several federal Liberal cabinet ministers have been guests of the Irving family at their fishing camp in New Brunswick. And whereas it appears that accepting such benefits is a violation of cabinet conflict of interest guidelines, and whereas the Irving family must be very lonely for company if they keep inviting cabinet ministers to go fishing with them, even if it violates federal cabinet ethics, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House, particularly those who own or part-own a fishing camp of their own, reach out to the lonesome Irvings and invite them to go fishing with us the next time we head out for some recreational angling. Mr. Speaker, I seek waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There are several noes. Notice is tabled. The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Sunday, October the 26th, 2003, Gordon and Norma Patterson of Kempt Head, Bullardry Island, celebrated their 44th wedding anniversary. And whereas Gordon Patterson on this special occasion proudly displayed his peacekeeping medal, symbolizing not only his contribution to world peace, but his accomplishments in maintaining peace at home for 44 years. And whereas the celebration was well attended by family members and friends, which is a clear indication of the Pattersons' commitment to both family and community, therefore be it resolved that all members of the legislature extend our best wishes to Norma and Gordon Patterson on the celebration of their 44th wedding anniversary and wish them many more happy years together. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver and passage without debate.
Question for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings North.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Kentville Fire Department are now in receipt of their new 2003 90-foot platform aerial ladder truck, and whereas the purchasing of fire emergency apparatus is an expensive proposition, with this new aerial truck costing over $1 million, and whereas the new unit replaced a 19-year-old aerial truck, which was deemed to be no longer safe for firefighters to use, therefore be it resolved that MLAs in this legislature commend Fire Chief Sean Ripley, the executive, and all members of the Kent Volunteer Fire Department for putting in tremendous time and effort towards seeing this new vehicle arrive in Kentville. I request waiver.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall adopt the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas many commercial sites in the city of Halifax, particularly along the Herring Cove Road and the Old Sambro Road, have lain for years without any cleanup or environmental remediation, and whereas these abandoned sites are now unfit for use and are sometimes hazardous to neighbours, and whereas the growing city of Halifax has a nearly insatiable appetite for development land which is being filled by expansion into wilderness areas, therefore be it resolved that this House requests the Ministers of Environment and of Municipal Affairs to draft legislation which requires environmental remediation of abandoned sites within a specified time frame and imposes penalties which are a genuine incentive to the clean-up and reuse of these lands. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Request for waiver. I hear no. Notice is tabled. The order, please. The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Public Works.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on future day I shall move adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 11-year-old Joe Hines of Windsor is taking the idea of showcasing poultry to a new height in the province, and whereas Joe will be participating this weekend in the Nova Scotia Purebred Poultry Association's Fall Classic in Truro, and whereas Joe has become such a hit with all maritime poultry owners that a lady from Prince Edward Island, who Joe has never met, sent him 4 chicks, 3 hens and a rooster, all of them just days old during the past winter, and Joe now looks after them in his spare room in the upstairs of his parents' home. Therefore, be it resolved that the MLAs in this legislature applaud the significant accomplishment of Joe Hines, son of well-known Windsor area residents Terry and Lisa Hines, and grandson of Hants County Exhibition Manager David Coombs, as Joe prepares for this weekend's major Nova Scotia Poultry Fall Classic in Truro. And I ask for a waiver notice.
Agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Cole-Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas lifelong Eastern Passage resident Clara Teresa McCormick was born on November 2nd, 1923. Whereas Clara and her husband Louis raised 5 children, Anne-Marie, Jerry, Philip, Monica, and Janice, and enjoy their 9 grandchildren. Whereas family and friends will gather on November 2nd, 2003 to celebrate Clara's 80th birthday. Therefore, be it resolved that members of this House congratulate Clara McCormick on her 80th birthday and wish her many more years of health and happiness. And I ask for waiver, Mr. Speaker.
Request for waivers, is it agreed? Order, please. Request for waivers, is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the high coastal barrens between Herring Cove and Ketch Harbour is a fragile ecosystem, much of which is under Crown ownership, and whereas the Herring Cove Backlands was proposed as a wilderness area in 2001, and Halifax Regional Council requested a feasibility report on this proposal from the Department of Environment in 2002, and whereas the survival of such areas is essential to the health and well-being of Nova Scotia and Nova Scotians alike, particularly on the outskirts of a growing urban core, and, according to the economist Thomas Power, protected natural areas make adjacent areas more attractive as places to live, work, and do business. Therefore, be it resolved that this House requests the Department of Environment to proceed with the designation of the Herring Cove Backlands as a wilderness area under the Wilderness Areas Protection Act. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
Waivers, is it agreed? Here are no. No's is tabled. Order, please. Orders of the day. Oral questions put by members. Question period begin at 2:34 and end at 4:04. The honourable leader of the official opposition.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, during the last election, we heard promises from the Conservatives that they would hire 350 new nurses, 100 doctors, 88 lab technologists over the next 4 years. The 2003-2004 business plan for the Department of Health says Nova Scotia places a high priority on health human resource planning initiatives in the areas of recruitment, retention, and retraining of healthcare professionals. Mr. Speaker, I am tabling a document which is entitled The Status of Recruitment Strategies in Capital Health, which says that of the 10 different types of positions listed, vacancies remain in every area except for X-ray technicians, and in that case, they are forecasting upcoming severe shortages. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Health is this: given that the Department of Health says in their business plan that they want to see an appropriate number of and distribution of healthcare providers in this province, will the minister admit now that that this is another failure of his government and more broken election promises?
Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And what I can tell the House through you is that this government, in fact, will work very vigorously at meeting its commitments made in the blueprint. And that progress is underway, Mr. Speaker, and the commitments will be met, and we will improve patient care in this province as we move forward.
The honourable leader of the official opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the first hard-to-fill position that is listed in the document is psychologist. The response of the Capital Health is to fill these positions on a temporary basis with less qualified individuals. Mr. Speaker, we've heard from people in mental health at Capital District that they are uncomfortable with being asked to provide what is called a provisional diagnosis. Patients are then treated as if they saw a properly qualified professional. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Health is this: will he confirm that mental health patients are being given provisional diagnoses by staff because his government is failing to recruit enough psychologists?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the task of recruiting physicians of all types in this country is a challenging one, and it is one that we are working toward. We're working very hard with that recruitment, and as all honourable members would know, it is a situation that is right across Canada, and it is one which we are addressing. We're addressing very vigorously. We've had results in the past, and we'll continue to have results as we move forward.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't think the Minister of Health actually gets it. People are being treated as if they had a diagnosis they didn't actually get. Mr. Speaker, the Capital District says that 3 cardiac perfusionist positions have been vacated in the past 2 years, 2 due to better compensation offers elsewhere. Now, Mr. Speaker, cardiac perfusionists are responsible for providing life-maintaining support during cardiovascular surgery, and they are not an optional member of the team. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is this: given that he is now squeezing hospital budgets even further, what is he prepared to do to effectively begin a real recruitment strategy for healthcare professionals in this province?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, what we are doing is building on what we have accomplished in the past, as I've indicated previously. We are working very hard at ensuring that we attract the highest qualified individuals that we can find to come to Nova Scotia to address the concerns indicated by the honourable member and many other concerns that are out there. It is an ongoing challenge, Mr. Speaker. It is one that we work at daily and will continue to work at and address the health care and patient needs of the people of this province.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. Nova Scotians have seen rapidly increasing automobile insurance rates over the last couple of years. This government knew that auto insurance was a problem long before it became a crisis. 1.5 years ago, the Liberal Party proposed an all-party committee that would examine this issue, but it was rejected by the other parties.
Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government responded only when this became a crisis. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business issued a report in September of this year that outlined the challenges facing small businesses in Nova Scotia. I have a copy of this report, and I'll table it for the House. This report indicates that over 33% of small businesses in Nova Scotia have experienced rate increases between 20 and 49%. My question for the Premier: what steps has this government taken to ensure that small businesses in Nova Scotia will have access to affordable commercial liability insurance?
The Honourable the Premier.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I refer that to the Minister responsible for the Insurance Act.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, in response to the Leader of the Third Party, I'd like to advise him that really he's a Johnny come lately to this particular problem. We started looking at this problem, Mr. Speaker, 2 years ago, and we came forward looking at only auto insurance, admittedly, but we came forward with a plan, and now I'm delighted that the Liberals have joined with the government in getting that bill through the House. With regard to casualty and property insurance, Mr. Speaker, I would advise him to talk to his representatives in the federal government who are responsible for that particular element of insurance.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party in your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this government has a responsibility to act, and the East Hants Tourism Association, a volunteer organization that promotes 2 important tourist attractions in their area, has seen their insurance premiums rise from $1,700 to $6,600 in the past year alone. This after members of the board contacted 25 companies to find a company willing to provide coverage. Many of our community and volunteer organizations, Mr. Speaker, will be left to fill in the gaps Affordable insurance is a necessity for these organizations. My question for the minister responsible for insurance: what specific action is being taken by this government to ensure that community organizations like the East Hants Tourism Association have accessible liability insurance?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, that's a very good question, and quite seriously, it's one that has to be addressed. The volunteers in Nova Scotia and the organizations that they support are indeed worthy of our utmost efforts to resolve the problems that they're presently having in getting liability insurance. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that we have done is to assign to the Auto Insurance Review Board the task of monitoring the situation with regard to other insurances, including liability insurance, and they will be reporting back to government, Mr. Speaker, by November the 1st of next year. In the interim, Mr. Speaker, our Superintendent of Insurance, whenever she hears of an organization that is having difficulty obtaining liability insurance, is indeed working to obtain that insurance for those particular organizations.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party, and your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My final supplemental is for the Premier. We, the Liberal caucus, is once again calling on this government to respond to the challenges of insurance, and we want an all-party committee to be struck on commercial liability and home insurance. So my question for the Premier: will the Premier agree to strike an all-party committee immediately to respond to the emerging crisis?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The government is far ahead of the opposition party. The piece of legislation that has passed the House is addressing that particular issue and addressing it effectively.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you for the Minister of Health, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've already heard today about the failure of this government on recruitment initiatives for Capital District. But I have a letter from Linda McNeil, which I will table, Mr. Speaker, the president of CAW Local 4600 in Sydney. She says that the staff shortages throughout this local have progressed to a point of crisis in our healthcare system. She goes on to say that this issue has been discussed through various avenues, but the bottom line is recruitment. Mr. Speaker, my question for the Minister of Health is, given that he can't seem to recruit health professionals to Metro Halifax, what exactly are his plans to deal with what workers in Cape Breton are calling a crisis there?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we're working with all of the health authorities right across the province in order to recruit healthcare workers. We're working, for instance, with the physicians of this province to ensure that we get the proper combination of physicians to fill the needs that are in the province. So we're actively identifying those needs, and we're actively recruiting. Mr. Speaker, we will continuously have to recruit in order to fulfill all of the needs that are out there. It's an ongoing process, and it's one that we are going to continue to do.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Ms. McNeil says in her letter that her members are working 36 hours straight and that soon our healthcare workers will become healthcare patients. As she says, this is unsafe and unacceptable for both the workers and their patients. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Health is, what is he prepared to do today to deal with this disaster that Ms. McNeil is predicting in Cape Breton healthcare services?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, as the district health authorities bring forward their needs to us, we work very actively with them in recruitment activities in order to fulfill those needs. So, Mr. Speaker, we do work with the health authorities. We do work to address the concerns that they have relative to personnel in delivering patient care in this province, and we'll continue to work with the district health authorities as they identify their needs, Mr. Speaker.
Member Cape Breton Nova on your final supplementary.
That's not good enough. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's clear that the part of the problem is the uncertainty over budgets and resources for health care, a problem that this government seems unwilling to deal with, Mr. Speaker. Right. Ms. McNeil indicates that her union will be lobbying the provincial government for more funding for recruitment of professionals. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Health is, will he today commit to a meeting with Ms. McNeil and her members, as well as the members of the Cape Breton District Health Authority, to find ways to address this critical situation?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I indicated to the honourable member in answer to his previous question, we work very closely with the District Health Authority in addressing the concerns that they have. We will continue to work with them. We meet with them on an ongoing basis, and Mr. Speaker, I'm quite prepared to continue working with the District Health Authority to address any concerns which they identify. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, recently our office has been contacted by Mrs. Dorothy Carson of Five Islands, who expressed some concerns on the experiences her mother is encountering with the healthcare system. For over a year, Mrs. Carson's 81-year-old mother has been waiting for knee replacement surgery. Wheelchair-bound and living in pain, Mrs. Carson thought her mother's painful journey had come to an end when her surgeon's office contacted her October 17th to schedule surgery for October 24th. On the 23rd, Mr. Speaker, the family made the trek to Halifax.
Order, please. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, on the 23rd, the family made the trek to Halifax, went through x-rays, blood work, EKGs, all of the standard requisites for pre-admission. At 12 noon on the 24th, she arrived at the hospital, was checked in, prepped for surgery, and only told by the surgeon at 2:30 that afternoon that her surgery was canceled due to a lack of beds. My question, Mr. Speaker, for the minister, could the minister please explain to Mrs. Carson how her mother's situation was allowed to happen?
The honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have an ongoing process in place through the Department of Health with the cooperation of all of the district health authorities to address the wait time issue, both from the perspective of patient to specialist, from the perspective of diagnostic treatment, to the issue of surgery, and in particular orthopedic surgery. Mr. Speaker, that group is headed by Dr. Mike McKenzie, who is the Chief of Staff for St. Martha's Hospital in Nanny-Kanish. And Mr. Speaker, we look forward to their work to assist us in addressing the concerns as outlined and identified by the honourable member.
Honourable member Glace Bay on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this is an 81-year-old Nova Scotian who has been living in pain for over a year. And I'm wondering if this is what our older population is looking forward to. Today, Mr. Speaker, we heard the Deputy Minister of Health tell the Public Accounts Committee that wait times are not an indication of how well the healthcare system is running. Well, Mr. Speaker, I stand here in my place on behalf of Mrs. Carson and her mother and many others to say it is a very clear indication of just how our healthcare system is operating. My question to the minister, Mr. Speaker, could the minister please explain in his own words how the case I just described is an example of how a healthcare system is running effectively?
The honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the issue of wait times is one which we take very seriously. It is one that affects patient care. It is one, as I have indicated in my answer to the previous question, that we are addressing through the combined efforts of the Department of Health and the district health authorities. Mr. Speaker, it is an issue, it is a challenge, and we are working toward that, and Mr. Speaker, we're going to address it.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I don't think, quite frankly, that the people of Nova Scotia have much faith in this minister's rather hollow answers. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is the healthcare system is failing them. It's this minister, it's this government who is to blame, Mr. Speaker. And a $147 million tax scheme supported by the NDP won't do anything to help address the problem either, Mr. Speaker. Absolutely nothing.
Order, please. The honourable member for Glace Bay on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is, what is the minister willing to do today to ensure that situations experienced by Mrs. Carson's mother and many others like this will never happen again.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, all members of this House have in fact encountered citizens of the province who are concerned about wait times, and indeed there are situations where people want to be treated much more quickly than they currently are. That, Mr. Speaker, is being addressed, and as the honourable member might remember from the testimony he heard this morning, it is not a matter of money. It is a structural approach that needs to be addressed, and Mr. Speaker, we're working toward that, and Mr. Speaker, we are going to resolve that issue and resolve it satisfactorily. It cannot happen overnight, however, but we will work toward reaching a resolution. Thank you.
The honourable member for Hants East.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today the BSC Task Force report was tabled earlier. The task force found what we knew before, that current programs could not address the present crisis in the beef industry. And what the members of this House may not know, but the minister knew, was that I told him a month ago I would join his task force under one condition. And that was, if the task force recommended spending money and he would guarantee me that he'd do that, I would have joined the task force.
Hear, hear. Spend the money. Show me the money.
Order, please.
So I guess...
Order, please. The honourable member for Hants East has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I guess the members here know what the answer was I got from the minister. So I asked the minister today, in light of the two recommendations that require money from the government, will he commit today that his government will spend the necessary money to carry beef, dairy, and sheep producers through this ongoing crisis?
Hear, hear.
The honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question and his apparent interest in this issue, since I do recall a conversation I had with him when I did ask him to participate. And the members know full well that I got
Order, please. The honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries has the floor.
Members know full well that I just got the recommendations, and I will be looking at them and finding out what we can or cannot do.
The honourable member Hants East on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That minister may be a rookie in this House, but I'm not. He's had a member of his caucus. He's had a member from his caucus as chair of that task force. He's had lots of opportunity to know where the direction of this task force has been going. Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member. Order, please. The honourable member Hants East on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear.
The minister has had a month to run what he would suspect to be a reasonable request from the industry for money past his colleagues at the cabinet table. So I want to ask him, has he done that?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as he would look at the recommendations from the task force, he would understand that it was done at arm's length to look at the industry, to come back with the recommendations, and I got them today. Thank you very much.
Now, Member Hants East on your final supplementary.
And the former minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I fail to see how a member of the Tory party as chair would make it at arm's length.
And the former Tory minister.
Yeah, and a former Tory minister on it.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Order. How can anyone hear the questions or the answers? I would hope the honourable member is not suggesting impugning motive on another member in this House. Well, order, please. Well, impugning motive is not a statement of facts, nor is it accepted in this House. And that's the way the chair would take that. Read Hansard what he said. Order, please. Honourable member Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not impugning motive, but if I can move the minister to a motive to help beef farmers in this province, that's what I'm doing. This government takes great fanfare in hooking any support for agriculture, which is precious little, on any federal program. that may or may not be coming in this case. So I want to ask the minister, in light of the fact that we need a made in Nova Scotia solution, in light of the fact that other provinces have anteed up and helped their producers, I want to know today, what's your commitment to beef, dairy, and sheep producers in this province who need help on this ongoing crisis?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries, Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my commitment to the beef and all ruminant livestock industries is that we're there to help them and that we understand the problems that they're having. I will remind the members opposite.
Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Remind the members opposite is that the farming community was not looked at in their 7 platitudes, nor was the member willing to participate in my task force, nor was he able to make a presentation to that group. So, thank you very much. Doesn't care.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Finance. Nova Scotians, like Dorothy Carson's, who was referenced by the member from Glace Bay a short while ago, Dorothy Carson's mother, are concerned about cancelled operations, long waiting times, hiring freezes, cutbacks that occur in health. This morning, in the Public Accounts Committee, the Deputy Minister of Health shared with the committee some interesting information about his concerns that were expressed last spring about a budget that was tabled before this House. He conveyed to the Public Accounts Committee that last spring he vigorously and repeatedly objected to more senior officials in the government that the allocation for the Department of Health was inadequate in this year's budget. My question for the Minister of Finance, will the Minister of Finance avoid a Freedom of Information application and share with Nova Scotians and this House the memos that express the vigorous and repeated objections of the Deputy Minister of Health about the budget this year?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And to the honourable member, I will ask the Minister of Health to respond on that. What I know we did as part of the process was to increase and give 3-year funding for the DHAs. There is a lot of pressure from all the departments in the government to advance their programs, and indeed pressures on them all. Mr. Speaker, that's why, again, we reacted in September to some of the pressures to the DHAs. So for the honourable member to say, let's talk about 1 month, there's been a process since this government became the government of having to fund those DHAs and to give them the money they need.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this question is about what was known back in the spring. The pieces of the bogus budget mystery are finally coming together. A full 5 months after the Deputy Minister of Health said there was a budget shortfall in health, the Finance Minister admitted in September of this year that indeed there was a $19 million problem with the health budget. For even longer, the Department of Finance knew about a census equalization problem that amounted to $22 million, but again, it didn't make it into the spring budget. Now, if either of these amounts were allotted for, we wouldn't have had a balanced budget. My question is for the Premier. Mr. Premier, why did you allow a budget to be tabled before this House in the spring of this year that your government knew was not balanced?
Now will the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to have that question today because it allows me to remind the House of an article or a release from the Metropolitan Halifax Chamber of Commerce in which they, in October of this year, well after the budget was tabled in the spring, extended congratulations to the Government of Nova Scotia for improving the province's bond rating from A- stable to A- positive. According to Standard & Poor's, Nova Scotia's credit rating improved based on some of the following factors, and this is from the Chamber of Commerce. 2 consecutive balanced budgets due primarily to measures undertaken by the government to control spending. Lower debt to GDP ratio and foreign currency debt exposure, solid economic performance in 2002, and expectations for continued growth in 2003. Nova Scotia's debt reduction plan, and the province becoming one of the first in Canada to report its finances on a fully consolidated basis.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party in your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, nothing, absolute. Mr. Speaker, absolutely.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Was said by the Premier went to the question that was put to him in the first place about what he knew. And isn't it interesting that the Premier is selective about citing from the Chamber of Commerce when he knows full well that with respect to the choices that were made in this budget, the Chamber of Commerce said that the debt was more important than his misspent tax scheme. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians want to know what this government knew at the time that this budget was tabled. Could it have been that there was an election coming down the pike at some later date in the year, and for that reason, we had ourselves in a situation where there were two balanced budgets? My question for the Premier, without referring to the Dominion Bond Rating Agency, which itself said the tax cut shouldn't go forward, will the Premier admit that this government knew the spring budget was not in balance?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, every expert that has analyzed what's happening in Nova Scotia has praised this government for its budgeting, for its controlling of expenditures, for its good management of the public purse. The only Nova Scotian who questions this government is the leader of the third party, and he has an agenda.
Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, today at the Public Accounts Committee, the Deputy Minister of Health stated that long wait lists for health care don't really tell us anything, Mr. Speaker, about the state of our health system. Now, Mr. Speaker, this statement is disturbing in light of the long wait times that many Nova Scotians face for surgeries and diagnostic procedures. The wait for joint replacement surgery can take up to 2 years, Mr. Speaker, and in the meantime, patients have pain. The deterioration of other joints may lead to the need for even more surgery. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Minister of Health, do you share your Deputy Minister's belief that wait times for health care aren't really an important indicator of how well our health care system is doing?
Right on.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the members of the official opposition at times like to take things out of context, and they like to use opportunities to create pictures that don't really exist, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member knows full well that the deputy this morning in his answer referenced the structure and the need to address the structure of the delivery of the healthcare problem, and we are doing that. The honourable member, in fairness, would share with the House that the deputy did in fact express his compassion with respect to the issue of wait times and the need to address that particular concern. That, Mr. Speaker, is what went on this morning.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham on your first supplementary.
Here, Maureen. Well, Mr. Speaker, with all due respect to the minister, I was there, I asked the question, I heard the answer, and I know what the Deputy Minister said, and it's on the record, Mr. Speaker. And with all due respect, he does not. Mr. Speaker, other procedures such as MRIs and cardiac catheterization are necessary before further treatment can occur. And in some cases, a patient's condition can worsen while they're waiting for these procedures, and in the end, they require more treatment. But apparently, if we listen to the Deputy Minister, this is only a structural problem, Mr. Speaker. It's not really a problem in our healthcare system. So, Mr. Speaker, health care delayed is often health care denied. So I want to ask the Minister of Health, when will you admit that your Deputy Minister was trying to downplay your government's failure to fix the problems in the healthcare system?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are, in fact, addressing the wait list problem. For cardiac care, for instance, we've increased our capacity. We've opened a new cardiac lab. That has resulted in reduced wait times in that area. Mr. Speaker, we are addressing other areas. Mr. Speaker, to say that something is just a structural problem is not minimizing the problem. What it does is distinguish how the problem is to be addressed. And it is not to be addressed simply by throwing more money at it, which is the first and only answer that that group over there can come forward with.
Gentleman member for Halifax Needham on your final supplementary.
Too much in health care. You're spending too much in health care now.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the former Liberal government tried to hide the problem when it stopped releasing the annual updates on wait times after 1996. And then this government has followed suit, Mr. Speaker, failing to release any comprehensive statistics for all wait times across this province during its entire mandate. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the minister, what is your government so afraid of that you're trying to downplay and disguise the real problem with wait times from the people of Nova Scotia?
Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, when you put in place a process, when you put in place officials and medical practitioners, people from the district health authorities to go out and address the problem of wait times, you're not hiding it, Mr. Speaker. You're meeting it head on, you're dealing with it, and you're going to come forward with a solution to it, Mr. Speaker. That's the approach we're taking.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Finance. Today, both in public accounts and in media interviews, the Deputy Minister of Health indicated that he did not have any problem with the fact that we are 7 months into the fiscal year and business plans for the district health authorities have yet to be approved by government. As the Minister of Finance would know, this type of indecision leads to serious challenges in this fiscal year and provides obstacles in planning for next year. My question to the Minister
Order,
of Finance.
Please. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park has the
How
floor.
any organization is expected to operate effectively or plan for the future when it is 7 months into the fiscal year and their budget plan has yet to be approved.
The honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And since her question was directly at the DHAs and the Department of Health, I'll ask the Minister of Health to respond.
The honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, what the DHAs did in fact know is that they had approved increased funding in the amount of 7% for their operations as they began the year. Mr. Speaker, what we did request of the DHAs is to examine their business plans to see what other areas. Now, just to put it in context, Mr. Speaker, we have gone as a government from deficits of DHAs of $220 million a year. Last year, it was down to $20 million a year. This year, Mr. Speaker, we're approaching zero, and that's how we're managing the health care system.
The member for Halifax Clayton Park on your first supplementary.
I think the federal government has had a great deal to do with the improved results, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question was for the minister.
Order, please. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on the first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, that's all very interesting, but I did ask the question of the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is this government is slow in approving these health plans. They went through an election by stalling and asking DHAs to resubmit their plans. The reality is these DHAs should be working on the plan for next year, not addressing the challenges faced because of the government indecision this year. My question to the Minister of Finance, Mr. Speaker, is, could the Minister of Finance explain why the DHAs were asked to resubmit business plans either just prior to or during an election?
The honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I think in response to that question, I will point out to the honourable member what we told him at the September when we were making our midterm correction in our finance forecast. We indicated to them that we saw some possibility that the revenues were going to go down. So we had to undertake some plans that would make the correction for that because we knew we had to bring in a balanced budget. We knew we had to look at the options to be able to find some areas of saving. Mr. Speaker, that's what the Minister of Health just told her that the DHAs are doing. We've recognized their problem last year in the increase of the long-term funding. We recognized the pressure they had in September. And, Mr. Speaker, they're just working their way through the process. And the honourable member, if she's been in the corporate world, will know that's what corporations do all the time.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on your final supplementary.
We're not all from Bedrock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think what we're hearing is that the pressures were recognized even at the budget time last April. Mr. Speaker, there were one of two reasons, as I see it, for resubmitting. Either because there was bad news contained within the plans, because the budget numbers this government originally provided were unrealistic for health, or the original budgets and business plans submitted by the DHAs needed to be reworked to address the fact that the books of this government are indeed not balanced. My final question to the Minister of Finance. In July, were the DHAs asked to resubmit their business plans because they contained unrealistically low budget numbers that would have resulted in bad news during the election? Or were DHAs being asked to cut back their requests to reflect the fiscal crisis the government knew we were facing?
Now, Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I indicated before, all of the departments, as they look at pressures, as they look at the pressures that are coming on them, look for ways to be able to stay within their envelope. But I do want to come back to one thing that the honourable member said, and she referred to the fact that the federal government provides a lot of that money. I think what she should be saying is that this House should be talking to Ottawa about getting the Romano report so we can provide the health care that no Canadians want.
The honourable leader of official opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. We have news today that Stenpro, Steel and Engine Products Limited, has announced the layoff of 90 employees at its Queens County operation. We're talking about the loss of 90 jobs in a part of the province that has seen its population decline by 5.6% in just the last 5 years. With a job loss of this magnitude, your government must have known that the news was coming. So my question to the Premier is this: what did your government do to help Stenpro's owners and employees avoid these layoffs?
Good question.
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I refer that to the Minister of Economic Development.
Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the honourable member asked a very good question. And this government and myself as minister representing the department have had contact with the Irving Group in regards to the business plan go forward with Stenpro. As well, as late as yesterday, we met with the mayor and economic development people from the area of Queens County.
The honourable leader of the official opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, my question is to the Premier. This is the same area of the province that was recently left holding the bag for over $400,000 when Service Zone walked away from an agreement to open a call center in Liverpool. I saw as well the mayor of the municipality of Queens here at the House yesterday. Today, he has called the layoffs devastating news and a huge dislocation for this community, and he is calling for assistance from the province. So my question to the Premier is, what have you told the Mayor of Queens that you will do to help save or help replace these jobs?
Good question.
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I personally have not spoken to the Mayor in the last 24 hours about this initiative. But I think it's fair to point out, Mr. Speaker, that the opposition party can't have it both ways. When government spends money on economic development, they criticize government. And here now they have a specific instance in which they want government to become involved. Now, I don't mind them having a position, but they can't have two positions on the same question.
The honourable leader of the official opposition on your final supplementary.
And no help. Mr. Speaker, I think it's unfortunate that we have a rhetorical response to a serious question.
Right.
My question for the Premier: Stenpro has been a vital part of the Queens County economy for more than 50 years. The current owner of Stenpro, the Irvings, has said that was trying to carve out another niche for the operation, doing offshore and other service work. if this government and the previous Liberal government had bargained hard for an offshore benefits agreement that truly benefited Nova Scotians, there would be much more work for operations like Stenpro. So my question to the Premier is this: what are you doing to help find new markets for Stenpro products in order to save jobs at this operations that are so vital to Queens County?
The Honourable the Premier.
I refer that to the Minister of Economic Development.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And obviously, the honourable member's question points out his need for playing politics instead of dealing with business growth in rural Nova Scotia. Here we have a company that has worked in the community with fluctuating employment levels, owned by the same company for over 30 years. They've experienced downturns through those years, and they've experienced good times. We're prepared to work with that company to find other forms of work to see if we can keep the fabrication in line and going. We're prepared to work with the community instead of play politics, unlike the honourable member.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is for the Minister of Health. As with many other health professionals, paramedics have learned the hard way the level of respect which the government views them and their roles in the healthcare system. So when paramedics read one of this government's election promises in the Blue Book, which I could table, new bursaries for advanced care paramedic program, they were somewhat skeptical. Since you need to be a current paramedic to take advantage of this program, Mr. Speaker, many of them are married with families and financial commitments, and a return to school is a major decision. Will the Minister tell this House and all paramedics the value of these bursaries and when they'll be available?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That's a matter that is being actively worked upon, and when we are in a position to come forward with the details relative to the program, we will make that known. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid on your first supplementary.
I guess that might be on the list of one of the unkept promises, as we've seen in the previous government mandates. Everyone in this House is aware of the trends we see as nurses, technologists, and other healthcare providers being recruited out of province. I'm sad to say that the same things are happening to the paramedics presently. I'm personally aware of over 20 paramedics in the last 2 years have left this province and have left many positions unfilled, most of them in rural Nova Scotia. So since this agreement is part of since this service agreement are part of the proposal in the bursaries, will the Minister give any details on how long these agreements will be for the service agreements?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. When the program is in place, we will provide as much detail as we can. And I can tell the honourable member, Mr. Speaker, that we value highly the paramedics of this province. I had an opportunity yesterday evening, Mr. Speaker, to spend a couple of hours with many of Nova Scotia's paramedics as they embarked upon a 3-day seminar on the issue of research and the role that paramedics should play in research. And it was a very interesting discussion, Mr. Speaker. I spent the time there because I value the service that they provide to the people of this province.
I will member Sackville-Cobequid on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But I was a paramedic outside this House not too long ago when the government was showing how much respect they had for paramedics then. Tuition for this paramedic program is very expensive, Mr. Speaker, more than $10,000 for a full-time program, and believe it or not, $20,000 for the part-time program. Yes, Mr. Speaker, the part-time program is even more expensive than the full-time. Since this government made the commitment with no plan in place as of yet to achieve this, will the Minister commit to establish an advisory committee of paramedics to design this program for the 2004-2005 budget?
The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The work relative to the program is underway, and Mr. Speaker, I can. We're not going to govern by committee here, Mr. Speaker. When we have a program in place, we will in fact make it known, and that program, Mr. Speaker, will include consultation with those who are most affected, being the paramedics.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the for the Minister of Community Services. Mr. Speaker, Albert Bourgeois of 20 Colby Street in Sydney had need to collect social assistance more than 10 years ago. And Mr. Bourgeois, at the time, was required to apply for Canada Pension, which he did. And when his Canada Pension came in, there was a clawback, which he obliged very willingly to the Department of Community Services. And they collected upwards of $7,000 out of the money that he received. 10 years after the fact, the Department of Community Services are now looking for an additional $600 from Mr. Bourgeois, even though he followed all the rules and the regulations, and the department conducted their own audit of this particular file. Will the minister please admit, given the fact that he is familiar with this case, that his department is in error and stop harassing Mr. Bourgeois?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think the member opposite would know that we do not discuss individual cases here on the floor of the House. That's not appropriate. It contradicts the whole concept of confidentiality. But if the member would like me to talk about policy, I'd be pleased to discuss it here in this chamber.
Now, Member Cape Breton West on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will table a letter from Mr. Bourgeois authorizing to raise this issue in the House publicly so that the minister will feel comfortable in responding forthright. I will also table a copy of a letter that was sent to the minister on this particular file by my colleague from Cape Breton South, asking for the minister to take corrective action. Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister: will the minister review the actions of the collections unit and please stop bothering Mr. Bourgeois, given the fact that this is 10 years after the fact and he followed all procedures, even abiding by the audit within the Department of Community Services itself?
Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, one of the difficulties in trying to explain the department's decisions when people take advantage of the immunity that's given to them in the House is that they can bring up specific cases, but we are not able to address specific cases in the House. And I know that the member opposite would not want me to betray that confidence that's placed in the minister. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West on your final supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I tabled a letter authorizing disclosure, and Mr. Bourgeois did that in his own handwriting. So the minister can bury his head, hide behind the bureaucratic or the political process or whatever he wants to do. It doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is Mr. Bourgeois has followed all the rules of engagement, if you want to put it that way. He's abided by every law, every rule, every regulation, and yet the department continues to harass him because they made a mistake, apparently, 10 years ago. Would the minister please table the complete departmental policy from the collections unit as being prescribed in cases such as Mr. Bourgeois?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, the Department of Community Services is a place to go for people that have run out of other options. Sometimes, Mr. Speaker, when people become sick or they have an accident and they're not able to work anymore, they will apply to Canada Pension Plan. Canada Pension Plan, I would suggest, at least from my experience, is a difficult process to obtain a Canada Pension Plan disability pension. The Department of Community Services will step in those instances and support people until such time, and assuming that they get their Canada pension. But the condition is that upon receiving the pension, they have to repay the monies that are advanced to them. Should they not be successful in getting the pension, it is forgiven.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South Portland Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Community Services. Mr. Speaker, for 12 weeks, women and children experiencing family violence in Cumberland County have had very reduced services due to the labour dispute at Autumn House. The board of Autumn House, faced with an operating deficit, is asking staff to give up their benefits and allow volunteers to do some of their work. Staff says it should not have to give up benefits to make up for underfunding. Mr. Speaker, this strike has dragged on long enough, and these critical services are threatened. So my question to the Minister of Community Services is, as sole funder of Autumn House, when is your department going to step in and resolve this dispute?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, this has been a difficult situation. I know that, in fact, the two MLAs, that from Cumberland North and Cumberland South, have also expressed their concerns to me about anything that possibly could be done. What we have, Mr. Speaker, is we have a situation where we do fund transition houses, all 9 of them across the province, to provide certain services, and that is also being done with Autumn House. Should the Board of Directors of Autumn House wish to augment those services and provide more, then it is up to the Board of Directors to cover the incremental costs of the additional services.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley, on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Autumn House is emulated by transition houses not only across Canada but in the United States as well because of its community outreach approach. It is unique in Nova Scotia. This model was adapted for a rural community so it could better meet the needs of women and children. The board has stated that it will likely have to revert to a shelter-only model because it cannot fundraise enough each year to make up the 25% funding deficiency. Mr. Speaker, these services are filling a critical need in rural Nova Scotia. So I ask the Minister, instead of copying this successful model, why are you allowing it to be torn apart by inadequate funding?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when the province took over the delivery of community services, uploaded it from the municipalities, it fully funded 9 beds and 8 full-time positions for Autumn House, which is what was prescribed by the formula. This is a fully funded 9 beds and 8 full-time positions. It is not a partial funding situation, Mr. Speaker.
Now, Member for Dartmouth South, Portland Valley, on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, transition houses, women's centres, and men's treatment programs have gone on for over a year in Nova Scotia with quarter-to-quarter funding. Autumn House isn't alone in its budgetary crisis, but the need is still there. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister, when will your government stop the delays and provide secure, adequate, long-term funding for essential services like Autumn House?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, in order to make sure that transition houses such as Autumn House are able to attract good employees, and we do appreciate the staff that are here today delivering those services or wanting to deliver those services, this government provided a 9.3% raise so that all the transition houses in the province would be able to pass that on to their employees. And Mr. Speaker, I think in view of the financial circumstances in this province, that is a significant commitment on the part of this government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, a report undertaken some years ago identified the need to replace the existing 75-bed Richmond Villa, a long-term care facility located in St. Peters, Richmond County. Since that time, there have been a number of delays causing great concern for the residents, their families, and staff of the facility. For some time now, negotiations have been underway between the government and the St. Peters Lions Club for the parcel of land on which the new facility will be constructed. My question to the Minister of Health is, can the Minister of Health advise this House and the residents of Richmond County as to the status of the land purchase negotiations?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The board of directors of Richmond Villa are developing or have developed a offer to purchase agreement, and it's my understanding that they are, if they have not already done so, are in the process of bringing that forward to the to the Lions Club in question, and they're going to bring it forward to the department. We have not yet received it from the board, but we do anticipate receiving it in the very near future.
The honourable member for Richmond on your first supplementary.
Speaker, the current Richmond Villa must be replaced due to mold, air problems, and environmental concerns with the facility. The initial timetable from the government called for construction of the new facility to start in the fall of 2002. Therefore, my question again to the Minister of Health is, can the Minister advise this House and the residents of Richmond County as to what the current plan is for the construction and completion of the new Richmond Villa?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can indicate to the honourable member through you that as a result of the property having been identified and the assumption that indeed a purchase will occur, that detailed design work is currently underway with respect to that facility, that we anticipate that design work being completed in time for the necessary contracts to be let, so that hopefully construction would be underway by spring of 2004.
Member for Richmond on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure the residents of Richmond County will be pleased to hear that. Mr. Speaker, this government made a commitment to a new Richmond Villa some time ago. Residents, their families, and the staff at the current villa have been very patient in the face of these delays. Therefore, my final supplementary to the Minister is, in light of the budgetary pressures faced by this government, will the Minister of Health confirm today that the construction of the new Richmond Villa will proceed in the spring of 2004?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I had the opportunity to be in St. Peter's on Saturday, and when asked that question at a public gathering there, I did indeed confirm that it's our intention to proceed with construction in the spring of 2004. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Community Services. Mr. Speaker, 2 years ago this week, Tiffany Busk moved into Edward's house. This troubled teenager suffered from bipolar disorder and depression. Her mother informed staff about her condition. On November the 13th of 2001, Tiffany told a counselor that she was suicidal, but she received no treatment or intervention. And on the 6th day later, she committed suicide. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Community Services. Your staff met with the staff at Edwards House on Monday. What lessons has your department learned from this tragedy?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will acknowledge that there's extensive correspondence between the member opposite and me on this, and I'm aware that he was pressing for this meeting. I have not been briefed by staff on the outcome of the meeting as of this time, but I will look forward to hearing from them.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And when the minister receives the briefing, I'm sure that he will inform this honourable member and the House with respect to what lessons they have learned. Mr. Speaker, Tiffany's mother, Karen St. Onge, has been asking for 2 years that a judicial inquiry be held into the circumstances surrounding her daughter's death. She has reason to believe that proper procedures for care were not followed and that her daughter's mental illness was not taken seriously enough. Ms. St. Onge has not been able to obtain her daughter's record in spite of the fact that her daughter was under 18 years when she died. Mr. Speaker, through you to the Minister of Community Services, I ask the Minister, will you commit in this House today to release those records to Ms. St. Onge, Tiffany's mother, and next of kin?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member opposite would know that this case has received a tremendous amount of scrutiny, not only within the department but by professionals outside the department, and that to date, what has been allowed to be disclosed has been disclosed to Mrs. St. Ange.
Now, Member Dartmouth North, and your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would say to the Honourable Minister, Mr. Speaker, that the Minister is aware, and so is Karen St. Ange, that this is not sufficient, nor is it enough. Mr. Speaker, so far, Mrs. St. Ange has been denied a judicial inquiry into her daughter's death. She has been denied information for so long that she feels the only way to get answers is through an independent process. Mr. Speaker, through you to the Minister of Community Services, my question to the Minister is, given the implications of Tiffany Bus case may have for other Nova Scotians in group homes, will you recommend an independent public inquiry to be held in this case?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would appreciate having the chance to hear staff's recommendations as a result of their meeting this past Monday, and based on those recommendations, I would be able to give a better answer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture. Mr. Speaker, I take great pride in my fishing background, and I'm proud of all those who continue to make their living from the sea and would love to see this continue. There is a threat to this way of life, and I'm sure the Minister is aware of it. And if not, I will tell him it's about the Atlantic Fisheries Policy Review. Large fish processing companies and other investors are quickly buying up fishing licenses through under-the-table financial agreements that circumvent government policy. This needs correcting through the Atlantic Fisheries Policy Review. My question is, could the Minister tell Nova Scotians that he is committed to the principle that independent license owners are the foundation of Nova Scotia fishery and not of large corporate interests?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. The last ministers of the Atlantic Ministers meeting, Nova Scotia put forward those very concerns. Since the owner-operator concept is so important to the inshore fleet, and that's the under 45 size in Nova Scotia, and it's not functional in the 45 to 65 range, the policy is being very much opposed by the offshore sector. And this government put forward that there are strict concerns in this, and we'll be looking forward to a response from the federal government.
I'm a member for Digby Annapolis on your first supplementary.
Our fishermen don't seem to know anything about this. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia needs this government to advocate on their behalf. If our owner-operator fishing fleet fails under monopoly interests, our entire coastal community network will be at risk. Can the Minister tell the House what specific steps his government is taking to ensure that independent fishermen can continue their livelihood in the face of threats by large corporate interests?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I mentioned before, at our meetings with the federal ministers or the provincial ministers, this has come up on a number of occasions. In my conversations with the Honourable Minister of Fisheries, federal minister, we've discussed this on a number of occasions. They did release DFO did release a discussion paper on the topic. The processing sector and other sectors were not mentioned in it. And they seem to be ignoring the issue, and it's something that I'm bringing forward to my federal counterpart. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis on your final supplementary.
I believe the inshore fishermen would have great respect for this government if that was pushed a little harder. Individual fishermen are the backbone of this fishing communities around this province. What specifically is the Minister going to do to ensure the owner-operator principle is upheld at the federal level?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries.
Well, I would urge all of this assembly to speak to their members and speak to the federal government to push this issue, and I will be pushing it as best I can at all meetings that I have with our federal counterparts. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister responsible for the Insurance Act. Yesterday, the President of the Insurance Bureau of Canada said they have seen new documents from the government's actuary. and the IBC says that those documents say there will not be 20% savings to insurers from Bill 1. This information was prepared by the government actuary as late as last week, but the only actuary's report this government has tabled in the House is the one dated July 23rd of this year. This government didn't get the moniker of the most secretive government in Canada for nothing, Mr. Speaker. They earned it. Last week, I asked the minister to table all further actuarial reports that he has, and so far, that has not happened. So my question to the minister, when will the minister table all of the actuarial reports about the true impact of Bill 1?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, there's no hiding of any actuarial reports. As a matter of fact, the media have them, so I will be quite happy to table them. Speaker, the report that the IBC is referring to, Mr. Speaker, is not a government report. It was one that they commissioned or somebody commissioned, but certainly not the government of Nova Scotia. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't know if a report commissioned by the IBC should have more credence than a report asked for by the government, but I would suggest to you that they have a certain bias and a certain agenda that they're trying to push.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview, and your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, in condemning both the government and the Liberal Party yesterday, the IBC challenged the government to release all the actuarial information that it has. The IBC commissioned an actual report which they gave to the government and to the Liberal Party. The government actuary, they say, has commissioned and has submitted another report. Mr. Speaker, my question, and the Liberal Party last week said that they were in possession of additional reports that were not shared with the rest of the House. So my question to the minister responsible for the Insurance Act, why did this government allow Bill 1 to pass through the House without telling the people of Nova Scotia everything it knew about the bill's impact?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, we did. Our actuary came forward with a report based on the definition that we had arrived at, Mr. Speaker, and the one that's included in the Act. And based on that, our actuary stated that based on depending on the ROE, that the savings to the insurance companies would be between 18.3%, I believe it was, and 23%, Mr. Speaker. That's how we derived our 20% saving, Mr. Speaker, for the people, the motoring public of this province, who effective on Saturday, just 2 days from now, Mr. Speaker, will be insofar as their insurance premium is concerned, 20% better off than they are today.
Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview, and your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, surely the government can't be referring to this letter of October 13th from KPMG, which was drafted 10 days before the bill was amended and a full 2 weeks before the bill was passed by this House. The government can't have it both ways, Mr. Speaker. There are only two possibilities, and I'd like to ask the minister which one it is. Did the government pass Bill 1 without knowing the full implications of the bill as actually adopted by this House, or is there further actuarial advice that the government chose not to table and show the people of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the October 13th report, which I believe is the one the honourable member is speaking about, is the one on which we based our bill. Mr. Speaker, every time that we came forward with, at least I should say the Liberal Party came forward with changes to the definition, we ran those changes through the actuary, and the actuary actually came back with different results for those various words. We abandoned those particular suggestions, Mr. Speaker. The definition of a minor injury, as is in the Act, is the one that we used, and that, Mr. Speaker, was the last actuarial report that we received, dated October 13th, and Mr. Speaker, that is it.
The honourable member for Preston.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this year, the Ham government said in future they would add the development of a government-wide policy to incorporate environmental concerns in their programs. That statement comes 4 years after the government took for granted Nova Scotia's natural beauty and failed to deal with environmental problems. Clearly, one of the ways developing policy is through the reinstatement of the Roundtable on Environment and Economy. Mr. Speaker, the Nova Scotia Roundtable on Environment and Economy was established in 1998 by the previous PC government to promote sustainable development and provide input to the province's policies relating to it. Yet it was this government that cut the Roundtable. My question to the Minister of Environment is, will the government commit to reinstate the Nova Scotia Roundtable on Economy and Environment to permit Nova Scotians the opportunity of forwarding ideas that provide input to the province's environmental policies?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to bring to the attention of the member opposite the Green Plan, which was part of our election campaign plan, which is towards a sustainable environment, and it's something that we will be moving forward on, and we will be consulting with stakeholders in the province of Nova Scotia to ensure that we have sound environmental policies in place.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Preston, on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, what we have from this Tory government is inaction on important issues. Mr. Speaker, an independent body conducted a legislative review of the Environmental Act and submitted its recommendations to the Ham government in 2000. The government promised to respond to the report within 6 months, but has not done almost anything with the 46 recommendations. 3 years later, we see more inaction from the government when it said it would do something to address environmental issues. According to the Green Plan, the government said it would introduce amendments designed to strengthen the Environment Act during the fall 2003 legislative session, which hasn't happened. My question, when can Nova Scotians see concrete steps for this government with respect to updating the Environment Act?
Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and certainly because of all the issues that were on the table, it was difficult to get everything brought forward in time for the sitting of the legislature. But through the Green Plan and through consultation with stakeholders in the province, we certainly are looking forward to bringing forth amendments to the Environment Act in the future.
The Honourable Member for Preston, on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians have yet to see long-term leadership by this government in terms of promoting and sustaining our province's environmental health for future generations. They haven't updated the Environment Act. They've delivered a vague water strategy and inadequate Green Plan. But that's only part of the problem. This government has done almost nothing to increase the number of protected areas for most of the last 4 years, only committing to designating 2 specific spaces days before the call of an election. My question to the Minister of Environment again, what long-term plans does the government have in placing protected areas of the province, especially when they don't follow through with their commitment to introduction of the environmental legislation this fall?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we've certainly committed to moving forward with the designation of 2 protected areas, Gully Lake and Egg Mountain. My understanding is that there will be an exhaustive consultation process that will take place early in the spring and work its way through the summer months so that we can ensure that we have total involvement in that, and we will designate those areas at that point in time when that consultation is completed. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As of July of this year, this government has identified $59 million in assets of Nova Scotians requiring nursing home care. That figure surpasses the amount identified in all of 2002. Mr. Speaker, every day this government delays bringing fairness to long-term care, another $277,000 is taken from the pockets of seniors requiring nursing home care. That's $192 every minute seniors are forced to wait. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Premier. Nova Scotians want to know, where is the fairness?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the government has a number of serious challenges that it must deal with, many of which, of course, require the expenditure of taxpayer funds. The government has acknowledged that the health care needs of those in a long-term care facility should be provided out of the public purse. And we have a program that is addressing that.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, perhaps most disturbing is that this $59 million identified in just 7 months happened after the Ham government made its changes and said that it would bring fairness to nursing home costs. The reality is that seniors continue to pay and pay and pay for health care that would be covered in any other setting. So, Mr. Speaker, I asked the Premier, why have you chosen to ignore over 20,000 Nova Scotians who signed an NDP petition asking for this injustice to stop?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And yes, there is a great deal of public interest in this issue, and the government has responded with a program that will allow it to do exactly what Nova Scotians are indicating we should do, and that is provide health care for those in long-term care facilities. And we will do that in a program that we can afford.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The budget planning process is beginning for 2004-2005. The government will have to make many choices. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Premier is this. Will you finally listen to Nova Scotians, eliminate the unfair assessment process, and cover health care costs of nursing home residents beginning April 1st, 2004?
The Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and perhaps I should refer this to the Minister of Finance, but I will answer the question nonetheless. The budgetary process is a very difficult one in Nova Scotia. That's something that we learned the moment we took office back in 1999. But we have incrementally addressed many very serious issues that we faced in 1999, and we will continue to do so, not the least of which is providing appropriate funding for health care in the long-term care facilities.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is the Minister responsible for Community Services. Mr. Speaker, we're now 10 years, Mr. Speaker, into the Liberal so-called health care reform, Mr. Speaker. Part of that so-called health care reform was the closure of such institutions as the Cape Breton Children's Training Centre and the Halifax County Regional Rehab Centre, Mr. Speaker. Now, one of those residents was a young man by the name of Joseph Rich. Now, Mr. Rich, after 10 years, has still not found a permanent location in which to live. I want to ask the Minister of Community Services, how has this been allowed to happen?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to speak to the downsizing of that facility in the Dartmouth area. There was a program that was undertaken that was to try to get the residents back out to their own respective communities where that is possible. In some cases, the level of care that's required by the residents did not permit that to happen, and they had to stay in some sort of institutional setting. In this particular case, that care for those that were unable to go back to their home communities was provided by Quest, and that's a nonprofit association. And Quest moved forward initially to have us build a smaller institution, but subsequently chose to buy a couple of small options homes and made other provisions for those residents.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While I may agree with the Minister's assertion about Quest, the reality is that it's still his department's responsibility to look after Mr. Rich. Now, you know, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Rich's mother has been very vocal in trying to obtain responsible and appropriate area in which her son to live. Now, I've got here, and I'll table it at the end of my questions, Mr. Speaker, from August 29, 2001, a memo and public statement by the then Minister of Community Services stating that the negotiations are underway to locate a site for a new setting that will provide longer-term specialized care for accommodation for these residents. These residents are now being housed at Sunrise Manor, in a very inappropriate place for these 11 young men. Mr. Minister, when will you change your attitude and find them real accommodations?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I think that the reference is to find an appropriate site for them, and the service provider, which is now Quest, is located in Sunrise Manor, and in fact, to adapt this senior citizens complex to be appropriate to care or provide a proper home for those 11 remaining residents. Over $500,000 was spent to renovate the ground floor. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
A member for Cape Breton Centre on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, these are temporary locations, Mr. Speaker, for the people in our province that should be given the best priority when it comes to care, Mr. Speaker. They've been living over 2 years in temporary locations, a location that is totally inadequate for their needs. Small rooms for recreation, small bedrooms, really no green space for them, Mr. Minister. My question is very simple, Minister. When will your department provide them with the facilities that they need?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as I referenced before, Quest abandoned its plan to build another institution. They went for the small option version. They bought a couple of properties, and those that were remaining have been housed at Sunrise Manor. We've invested substantially to make those accommodations appropriate, and Mr. Speaker, we look forward to continue to work with Quest.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Since 1999, this minister and this government has had a report in the Department of Health completed by an extensive interdisciplinary working group on midwifery. This report included recommendations for the regulation and implementation of midwifery in Nova Scotia. My question to the minister, Mr. Speaker, why has this government made the decision to ignore this report?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We have not taken the decision to ignore the report. As a matter of fact, earlier this week I met with advocates of midwifery in this province. We had an extremely good meeting, Mr. Speaker. It was very positive, constructive, and they seem to be very pleased with the direction we're taking in that regard.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, well then I'm glad to hear that, because midwives play a vital role in the delivery of health care, or they can if the minister will allow it, especially when the number of physicians practicing obstetrics is declining and they're leaving. In fact, Mr. Speaker, it's interesting to note there are 2 fully trained professional midwives in the Valley area that are ready to work in this province, but they can't. They'd certainly provide an option to women in Yarmouth that have to drive for 2 hours to go in labor on the weekend. And Mr. Speaker, the service midwives deliver are cost-effective and go a long way to assist in the health and wellness of both mother and child. My question to the minister is, why has this government failed to see the benefits of regulating the profession of midwifery in this province?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and the honourable member should choose his words a bit more carefully. Indeed, there is service now available in Yarmouth, and there is no need for him to be causing alarm. It is not a permanent solution, but there is a situation in place that will address things. Mr. Speaker, we are moving forward with respect to the whole reform of the delivery of primary care in this province, and we're developing the necessary documentation and regulations to be able to do that. Mr. Speaker, I anticipate that the legislature in the near future will have an opportunity to discuss this even further with respect to putting in place that which the honourable member is requesting.
Member for Glace Bay and your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, there's another report on the minister's desk that's collecting dust that's called the Primary Health Care Renewal in Nova Scotia, Action for Healthier Nova Scotians. And on page 25